Okay, transformation global. Why do we need international perspectives? This is a topic for our first theme. So, deglobalization too, and thinking of the geopolitical transformation, we have this as a renewed focus again. We have been discussing this topic for many years already. Even if in Europe we discuss how economic dependency on non-democratic states can be reduced, one thing is very clear. The transformation processes, as Claudia Bocadan said, can only be addressed globally and locally. And in many areas, we cannot even actively act without being aware of the consequences of our action in other parts of the world and for the people there. And this is the global galactic bridge that we would like to embark on this morning, and we would like to take a look at different aspects. Yes, and for this purpose, we have different input presentations. The first is from Dr. Aída Ponce del Castillo of the European Trade Union Institute. She's a legal expert. And this is a video. This is not a live presentation or an in-person presentation. So she has a doctorate in legal matters from Valencia and Bonn. Regulatory questions of human genetics was the topic. She also has a master's in bioethics. Very interesting combination. She focuses on strategic research of the future and ethical regulatory matters in the context of new technologies. Now, in the video, she will be talking about the key factors of the future scenarios and the perspectives of the ETUI on the socio-economic transformations in society. It's a long title, but it's worthwhile. Yes, and this is a video that was pre-recorded, and we will now watch this together. It's a couple of minutes, maybe 5 to 6, and of course we will later go back to the topics in our discussion. So I hope this is a very insightful video for you.
When analyzing and looking at the future trends that our society and planet is going to face, or they are facing, we have looked at those big uncertainties that are driving the multiple crises: societal crisis, economic crisis, conflict crisis, climate crisis, and the way in which society is being driven today. And the most uncertain factors that we have identified as drivers of change are inequalities or equalities, whether a world that we can design in the future will be more equal or less equal, and whether we will be able as a society in general to tackle and control climate change or not. So those are big questions that we thought that were the most important ones to consider in order to plot what type of different alternatives we can think in designing our own future. Well, we have then elaborated 4 scenarios towards 2050 on the basis of 2 axes: the axis of inequalities or equalities and the axis of controlled climate change and uncontrolled climate change. And on the basis of those 2 axes, we have created 4 scenarios, and the options to which we have come up with are the following. So the first scenario that we call the high-tech hives, it's basically a scenario in which most of the society will be dominated by power and health, equally distributed, so we see that inequalities could diminish, but on the contrary, a scenario in which we didn't have the opportunity or the chance to control climate change. So on one hand, more equality and wealth distributed evenly, but in an uncontrolled climate change, which of course gives a lot of work to do for the next generation. So that's the scenario 1, which is high-tech hives. It's the idea of the bees controlling, the bee-like hive controlling the power in a society. Then another alternative that we thought about was scenario number 2, which is, we call it disconnected ghettos, in which again power and wealth would be held only by very few members of the population, just 1%, It's pretty much sometimes what we see here now with the super billionaires holding a lot of money today. So that scenario is having, again, the same type of wealth monopoly, but with a more with again a runaway climate change. So we didn't manage in between today and 2050 to control climate change. So we have then in this scenario a very difficult situation with social inequalities and a very difficult situation with the climate and the environment. So this is why we call it disconnected the ghettos, because everything will be disconnected and disentangled at every level of the societal dimension. The third alternative that we come up with is the quadrant number 3, or the scenario number 3, which is called the green castles power, or the green castles, in which the power and the health will be, again, held by 1% of the population, hence castles. But on the contrary, the society achieved to control climate change. So we would have people living in very good situations, others not. But the climate change issue would have been managed, and the consequences of the environmental catastrophes will not be seen anymore. So a less equal society for a well-distributed actions regarding managing and controlling climate. And the last scenario, the last alternative, is the scenario number 4, which is about eco-villages. So by the name of the scenario, you can see that in this situation, the climate change was controlled, but and the equality and the wealth are more evenly distributed. So you can think about as a nicer scenario compared to the ones in which climate change is not controlled at all. And here we can see that, there could be more social cohesion if social inequalities are lessened. These are the 4 alternatives that we considered when talking about the 4 very difficult crises that we are living today. But the hope for all of you is to look at everything what is happening in the world with a very big lens, so that we can see all the dimensions of the human being from every little aspect, whether it's from a climate, environmental perspective, whether we have to include the financial situation, global inflation, whether we have to include issues about governance and democracy, and whether we have to look also at issues of technological development and innovation. And all these things, we have to have them in our radar, because it's the only way in which we can really anticipate the future comprehensively, in which we can anticipate the future with a lot of precaution and with interesting action points. We need to have all these dimensions all together at the same time.
Thank you very much to Aída, because Aída really explained to us very clearly what it means if we speak about socio-ecological transformation. And these future scenarios show that there are alternatives, and they can also provide the basis for strategies. And we have the choice how to act. We have the choice to choose the direction first and then act accordingly. So thank you very much for providing us with this inspiration to Aída. Yes, thank you so much. And we will use everything that is provided to us as ideas, all the inspirational thoughts. They will not be lost, but they will carry us through the entire day and the different panels. And this is precisely what's going to happen for the second input, which is Professor Breno Pringle from Rio de Janeiro. We had a couple of technical hiccups, difficulties. These days we call it challenges, so we had technical challenges. And the video that we actually wanted to show you again is not lost. It's going to be retrievable on the media library, but unfortunately we could not get this ready for it this morning. On Professor Breno Pringle, he is a professor of political sociology at the Institute for Social and Political Studies at the State University of Rio. And the topic he intended to speak about, which is highly interesting because it also gives us the perspective of the global south, is that we also need to involve the peoples of the south for a socio-ecological energy transformation. Again, we will use elements from his input for the panels. We are especially happy that our third speaker is here with us. We will not see a video, but she will be here right here. And now I would like to welcome Professor Dr. Vera Trappmann. She is professor at the University of Leeds Business School for Business Relations and Labor Relations. Before, she was a professor of business studies at the University of Magdeburg, and she is specializing in comparative studies of labor relations in Europe and also the impact on professional careers, focusing on precarious working conditions. This is what we're going to hear about in her input statement, because the division of labor is something that we will deal with to consider in the future, and international division of labor also requires international solidarity. And I believe that there is a great topic that we can use to illustrate this, and this is what Ms. Trappmann is dealing with. This is platform work. Here, international solidarity is especially important. And we are so happy to have her here. A warm welcome to you, Ms. Trappmann. Yes. Thank you, first and foremost, for having me. I am grateful that I have the opportunity to present the Leeds Index to you. This is something that we developed as a team in Leeds. We looked at protests of workers in the platform economy worldwide. For this, we developed a tool. This is publicly available, and I wanted to present this to you. We have a website that you can access, and then you might be interested in something. For example, what is happening in Berlin? What are the protest events that happened in the past? So you just click, and then you see that in that period of time from 2017 up to now, there were 16 protests in Berlin. And then you will receive some additional elements of information. You can zoom in and you can see here on the 29th of June of last year, there was something happening in Berlin, protests against Lieferando. So these were just a few dimensions that you can publicly see, that are publicly available. We have more information on all protest events in our database. And we researched for all protests what was the driving factor, what was this about, working conditions, employment status, or occupational health and safety, etc. And we also tried to identify the form of protest. So was that demonstration, a lock-off, or a legal action? And how was this institutionalized? For example, were there new trade unions created or new works councils? Then, what was also very relevant is we recorded who was behind these protests, so who was mobilizing for better working conditions in the platform community. And in the public debate, it mostly looks like the trade unions don't really have a say in this, and that all of this was grassroots driven. So this is why we differentiated very clearly between different players, whether these were spontaneous groupings of workers coming together or workers collectives, or were these new grassroots trade unions, and how many protests were also backed by traditional trade unions. Then we looked into the different countries, how many participants were involved, and how long did the protest take. What was our motivation? First of all, we want to document how much protest is actually happening. So the platform as a new way of organizing work and labor was something that was discussed a lot in recent years. Initially, people said that there is hardly anything you can do against this control by algorithms. And then suddenly we saw that there were protests being held, and then we wanted to find out what was happening at the global level. And we wanted to analyze patterns and forms of protests so that we can also make available this information to socio-political stakeholders. And here we can show you quite a lot of analyses. First of all, we have the geographical spread of the protests. Mainly in Europe and Asia, we have a high concentration of protest activities. And we can also look at the temporal distribution since 2017, when we started recording data up to the beginning of last year. And you can see, for example, that during the pandemic, there was a major momentum in protest activities. And this was basically about a lack of PPE, but also the most pertinent question of the status, whether we are independent contractors or rather employees. And let me point to you the first results because they are very important. The main motivation for protests in the platform economy is pay and not the algorithm control. So in 63.4% of protests, this was the main driver. And the second very important outcome is that in 31.4% of cases of protests, trade unions were on board. So we could clearly see that they were very important players in this domain. So this includes the established or traditional trade unions and the new trade unions. There is hardly any cooperation between new and old trade unions. So this again might be a very important point to take up because there is a lot of work to do. And we see major differences throughout the world in the world regions. On the one hand, we have strikes and log-offs, which are very far spread in Asia and Africa. Demonstrations are most frequent in Latin America, and in North America, it's mainly legal action against platform companies, and in Europe, it's more or less balanced. When we look at the distribution of who is active where, we can see that the established trade unions are mostly active in Europe and Australia in the platform economy, and least active in Latin America, where we have workers' collectives as the most frequent initiators of protests. And in Asia, we have new trade unions that are the most active group of protesters. We have two dominant patterns of protests. First of all, we have the distribution conflicts that are the more established conflicts, and here the protests are initiated by the workers themselves, and mostly through strikes and log-offs. And when we speak about the regulation of working conditions, we have established trade unions that come in quite a lot. And very often we also have legal action that is taken to do with the employment status. And we have quite a lot you can read about this. We have a website. I have brought along a link where you can also look at the tool in greater detail. We also issued a couple of reports for ETUI and other organizations, and we are quite happy that our paper was also accepted with RES, one of the most important journals in our domain, where we also published our key outcomes, and we also create country analyses on a regular basis. We have a database with 2,000 entries at the moment that is then evaluated, and my colleague did this for Germany. We do this for every country or for individual companies, as Dennis Neumann did for Germany. And if you are interested in this, please get in touch with us, what company you'd be interested in or which country. There is the scientific analysis on the one hand, but on the other hand, we also want you to make use of this. So if you see the database and also realize that there is an event, a protest event that we did not enter, then you can also use our crowdsourcing tool. We are also trying to really give a good picture of what is happening globally. And you can also subscribe to our newsletter, of course, and you can also follow us on Twitter. So I hope that this is a good and reasonable tool that might also be used by social and trade union players. Thank you very much. So please stay up here, don't run away. We would like to have you right here at the center. And once you're here, Ms. Trappmann, we would also like to ask you one or two questions. So, solidarity and the platform and fighting for solidarity on the platform, this is what you are committed to. And it's also about visibility, to show people that you're not alone, but there are protests around the world. This is a great tool. A couple of years ago, we very intensely discussed the topic of platform work, and I have the feeling that this has become less. Does this have to do with the polycentric crises around the world, or do you think that the world itself has changed? Well, it has to do with the multiple crises that we have to deal with at the moment, and they are kind of overlapping with the actual issue that we discussed. Of course, there is some success, especially looking to Germany. We see Works Council creations in the platform companies, so there has been kind of a shift. But this is a struggle which has not been completed. I believe that this has to do with the shift of attention. You know, there are so many things that you have to pay attention to as citizens, and there are so many challenges every day. We will speak about international perspectives in greater detail, and you already started with the German perspective. You spoke about German successes, and sometimes it's difficult to analyze those successes with international companies, but we will also speak about the socio-ecological transformation and the international perspectives. What do you think is a very important aspect? When it comes to the socio-ecological transformation, I think it would be really important to me to have an international perspective and to really maintain this. Because on the one hand, we are confronted with the major challenge that we want to defend our location as a site for industrial production here in Germany. And on the other hand, everything is interconnected. And we cannot lose sight of the fact that those who suffer most from the consequences of climate change have contributed very little. And now they also have to deal with the consequences of the so-called transformation. Just look at the conditions in those countries where raw materials are extracted. Then there is a major responsibility that we don't only have in Germany, but also elsewhere in this world. So climate change is, of course, a systemic issue, and we need to find systemic solutions. But let me also call upon those who are privileged to shoulder the responsibility and who are embarking on risky tracks in order to come to terms with the climate crisis. Thank you very much for being here. I believe that you're going to stay throughout the day, and I think that people can also try and contact you and ask you about the tool that you just presented. It is a great tool, and I think it will help many to intensify their protests. So thank you very much. I'm thanking you. Yes, and with this, we are going to kick off our panel discussion. Why do we need an international perspective? This is more of a rhetorical question, but we will now introduce three guests. Let me start with Bärbel Kofler. She is a Parliamentary State Secretary with the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development. From 2016 to 2021, she was the Federal Government Commissioner for Human Rights Policies and Humanitarian Aid in the Federal Foreign Office. And we will certainly speak about the United Nations Sustainability Summit last week, because there were additional funds which were also pledged by the minister, and they should also be used in order to improve the situation of women and girls. A warm welcome to you, State Secretary Kofler. And I would also like to welcome Birgit Steinborn. She is the chairwoman of the Central Works Council and the Vice Supervisory Board chairwoman with Siemens. She's one of the most powerful women in Germany, some say. And since 1978, she's been with Siemens. And since 2008, she has been a member of the Supervisory Board. And since 2014, she has been the chairwoman of the Central Works Council. We will certainly speak about the International Division of Labor with her. And she's also trying to embark on a new track with the Chinese business of China, of Siemens rather, and this is something that is not exclusive but inclusive. A warm welcome to you, Ms. Steinborn. And we would also like to welcome Thomas Fischer. He is the head of department of the German Confederation of Trade Unions. He is here to replace Elke Hanig, who has fallen sick. But we are glad to have him here. So his department is in charge of providing input for the major debates of our times by early recognition of future trends in society and also in the world of labor. And these are two spheres of work that are of pivotal importance for democracy and the social cohesion in our societies. A warm welcome to you as well.
We very much look forward to this round, and in the contributions and the presentations, as well as the words of introductions, we heard the following. International Division of Labor, ever since globalization, is a very urgent topic, but there is a shift going on, particularly against the backdrop of a political reorganization in the world, thinking of into-democracies, anti-democracies, autocracies, also against the background of the global climate crisis. We are all affected by it, but to a different extent, depending on where we live in the world. The question is, do we have to take back some production processes and services, or how can we design the relationship with these countries? And at the same time, the supply chains and work processes are highly diversified and depend on the matter of, on the one hand side, what are the raw materials, and on the other hand, what is the labor that we have available. And this leads to dealing differently with different standards and social security, but there are also basic questions pertaining to the difference between the global north and the global south. We just heard about that previously. Our national transformation processes against this backdrop, looking at this huge, scarce labor that we have, cannot be seen in an isolated national way. So we do not only lack skilled labor forces, but this is the case in the entire world. So my first question goes to the round. How do you notice from your different perspectives that a change in the field of international division of labor is taking place? Maybe Ms. Kufla, you can start. Sure, my pleasure. So actually this pertains to all topics. What keeps us very busy is a question that was touched upon here today, the socio-ecological transformation. And we call this just transition on purpose. So it's the same thing as if, for example, we work in coal mining, and if we want to and have to cut jobs because of ecological considerations, we need social security measures, we need to create new jobs, offer additional training, etc. And this is something that is a focus, like with South Africa, where we are promoting and fostering partnerships, but not only there, in other countries as well. And we intensely take a look at the matter of social security. This is of essence. Half of the people worldwide has no access to any kind of social security. Their family is their only safety net. It could be harvest fallouts, it could be health services, also how do people take care of old people. There is no social security. And that is why, how can we develop safety nets in this field? And internationally, this is something that keeps us very busy. How can we, for example, strengthen healthcare services, for example, to prevent a pandemic or prepare for a pandemic? So it's not only about the international cooperation, development cooperation funds that we always discuss, but it's actually also about what is the design of commercial treaties, what do we do on a European level, and also how can we strengthen the cooperation between employers and employees. We just saw the figures from the surveys. Last year I traveled to Bangladesh, and here trade union colleagues tell you how difficult it is to actually even organize, and how large the informal sector is. This is one problem, but also the freedom of assembly is something that is infringed upon, and this is a topic close to our hearts. We also want to strengthen the cooperation between trade unions. This is a topic that we very much focus on at the ministry. So there's a lot more too, but maybe this can suffice for the moment. Yes, I think we will touch upon more of these topics in our conversation, but I would like to now address Ms. Steinborn. Where do you see these changes above all? Well, maybe I can start by giving an example, and this example specifically relates to Berlin. International division of labor and international direction of companies is something that we have known for a long time. We have been living with this, if you will, for a long time. And a couple of years ago, I think it was 4 or 5 years ago, that there was this question: will Siemens invest in the site of Siemensstadt in Berlin, because there are major sites of production there, the biggest site of production of Siemens worldwide in a city? Or will Siemens leave Berlin and go to Singapore? That was the question back then. And back then, with the predecessor of the current mayor, I had a conversation, and he said it was just Siemens bluffing. If they say, oh, if we do not reach an agreement with the city, we will leave. And Singapore is also a beautiful city. And then I said, no, they're not bluffing. It's not a trick. This is a discussion we're having the entire time, not as necessarily the Central Works Council, but also in the Supervisory Board. And I wondered about the fact that there is not a lot of awareness on behalf of politicians of the fact that there's a global perspective regarding the board of such a big company. And what has changed in the meantime? Well, the geopolitical challenges are different. That is absolutely clear, as well as the dependence on China. At Siemens, there's not that huge of a dependence from China. But of course, this is not supposed to be further promoted. We talk about diversification. This means that the production sites are distributed across the world so that you can always supply the chain. There's one more thing I would like to mention because it may not be clear to many people. Siemens in Germany is well known. But Siemens has 360,000 employees within the entire enterprise, and 86,000 of these in Germany. In other regions, it would be a quarter each. So basically half in Europe, including Germany. In the Americas and Asia, it would be the other half broken down correspondingly. There is a strategy of the board which is also new. So ever since we have the new board as well as the new CEO, which is called Degree, the goals set would be based on a socio-ecological focus. Decarbonization, E for ethics, G for governance. This is the acronym explained, and governance also would be the recognition of workers' representatives. R is for resource efficiency, E for equity, so equity including diversity, and the other E in Degree for employability, which is further and additional training. We support this, and there are things in common, but I come from the side of the workers' representatives, and I can only say these are nice, colorful slides, but the discussion starts when it's about the implementation, and I'm sure that I could present some examples on this. So first of all, new division of labor carries a risk, but on the other hand, it also comes with opportunities. Siemens just invested 1 billion in Germany. They announced this. So this is an opportunity to strengthen Germany as a site of innovation. And it is a risk because it's not automatically, it doesn't happen automatically that China or the Americas can supply Germany with goods. And there could also be innovation and development hubs, for example, set up in India. Wow, that contained a lot of information. We would have so many questions, but we just would like to complete the round of introductions. And that's why, Mr. Fisher, the question goes to you. Well, there is a change in division of labor, and there are two things that I would like to comment on. Economic dependency would be one aspect. Currently, we are specifically focusing on fossil fuels because of the Ukraine, and we want to end the dependency from Russian exportations. But it is wrong to assume that the dependency would become less if we switch over to renewables. I think it's the opposite that will take place. Rare earths, minerals, etc., everything we need for the hardware from, for example, wind power plants and solar energies makes us dependent because of the raw materials we need for this. We also have to be a bit careful and cautious so that we do not slide into the dependency with the same countries that we currently have. Primarily, China and Russia are mentioned. In China, 60% would be rare earths from the mines, and also the processing would be 60% of these rare earths. And we need these for green hardware. Talking about Russia here, it's aluminum, for example, that we urgently need to develop the green hardware. So we will not be able to cut that off, but we have to diversify. And that's why the Global South is something we have to focus on more. And that is why I think it's such a pity that the author of the Manifesto of the Global South is not present. We do have a lot of possibilities to contact and cooperate with the Global South, but something should not happen. We cannot continue business as usual where we have a double exploitation in the Global South. On the one hand, there's a brutal extraction of raw materials and raw material extraction models which really destroy the environment, and at the same time there's an exploitation of cheap workers. We have international trade agreements, we have bilateral energy, hydrogen, raw material partnerships, particularly also in Latin American countries. We have instruments for promoting exterior trade. We have the Hermes guarantees, for example. All of these are instruments that can be tweaked and changed so that they uphold human rights and environmental protections. So that's where we should have more leverage. I always tend to speak too long, so I try to cut myself short. Another question is, if we talk about the new design of labor division, and we as trade unions say we need this division of labor, but we do not need a globalization based on a very well-known pattern, and that the market is the one setting the rules. What we see amongst the economic experts is that there's more and more insight that if we design international trade relationships, the government has to take a more relevant role in designing the policies and the regulations and rules. And we're talking about rules, for example, that the World Trade Organization, which currently is a bit hesitant, to put it some way polite, or the ILO norms. For us trade unions, this is the pivotal center where this can be regulated. The non-compliance with these regulations has to be followed by sanctions, and we can go into depth of this conversation later on if the floor is given to me again. So we have collected so many different keywords right now. Let's focus on some. We talked about the platform work already. We heard a presentation about this, Ms. Kuffler, but I don't want to talk specifically about platform work. It's just an example of social aspects and socio-ecological transformation. So the labor models, the working models are changing a lot. The place where you work, duration, labor conditions, working conditions, all of this is changing a lot. I already talked about the UN Sustainability Summit, but my question, for example, is Sustainability is probably an ecological focus, but how can the socio-ecological context be discussed, as well as working conditions, and also a change in the organization of labor? Well, first of all, I think we have to do away with the misconception that sustainability only has something to do with the environment. Of course, there is a very important link, thinking of planetary borders and the necessary transformation. But there are just as many goals, at least when it comes to the SDGs, focusing on social and labor matters. And SDG 8, it's about good work, good labor worldwide. And this is part of lots of programs by now. And here questions like, for example, the supply chain conditions, what this should look like. Do we want to just transport the exploitation from the 19th into the 20th century? I have seen how children work in coal mines with little donkeys, things we have seen in pictures from the 19th century. This still exists. We just transfer it into other areas of the world. So anyone who wants to fight poverty, hunger, has to focus on this. SDG 10 is the one underestimated, and this is about the inequality in the countries regarding distribution as well as worldwide. And that is why it has a lot to do with the labor work and the social situation. This is something we have to address. The possibilities of my ministry, I do not want to exaggerate this. We always have to have a clear picture of what we can do and what we can't. But what we can do is we can bring together the World Bank with the ILO. This is not a trivial or easy task. And to bring them together in a way that you use the financial resources of the World Bank, so that what ILO is claiming, the job accelerator, for example, so that we can bring these together, so that we have the expertise on behalf of ILO, and the World Bank should finance this. For example, this is what the World Bank meeting in Marrakesh will focus about. The last 2 UN summits also focused on this. And this greatly contributes into creating an opportunity to be on better track regarding the implementation of the SDGs. And if you don't do that, you will not be able to work on this matter. We as a ministry are trying to do this. This is pivotal. We also try to support the ILO key matters too. Then, of course, in Kenya, forced labor is very relevant. And we also have to take a look at where new dependencies are developed. Polysilicium, if you think of chips, the largest part is from Western Kenya. And on the other hand, the working conditions that I see in many countries of the global south are driven by 80% of the people working in the informal sector, and that we have a new young generation every year that is new to the labor market and is looking for jobs. So being able to implement these goals is absolutely of essence. And against this backdrop, I can also say that probably we're at the beginning only, but how can we strengthen the workers' representation in the global south is of the essence for us. Yes, Ms. Steinborn. Yeah, I would like to follow up on this. I believe that, particularly if we're talking about a global company like Siemens, which has to follow German or European law because it's a stock-listed company, it is important to also strengthen the rights of the workers' representatives here, because we can also take influence via our mandates in the supervisory boards, as well as our knowledge as to what happens in practice. And this requires a change in the statutes of the workers' representatives. The Supply Chain Act alone would not be sufficient. We need more rights when it comes to co-determination. The right, for example, to receive information about other parts of the world in Germany. Siemens, of course, has a European Works Council, the European Committee. We also have an international frame agreement. IFA, and last year this celebrated its 10th anniversary. 10 years already. And still, it's only now that we managed to create a network, because the trade unions in other countries, in some cases, are very fragmented, and these colleagues, to get them into working in a networked way there. So in the IFA agreement, it says everything: no child labor, to stick with the labor norms, and the management of Siemens has the business conduct guidelines. Every manager, everyone working there has to sign this all along the supply chain. No forced labor, no child labor, etc. But the question is, how can this actually then be implemented? And who would report an infringement? And I think these are the challenges that we are facing. And the Supply Chain Act and other legislation would be very good to support this, because it will not happen automatically. And also the business conduct guidelines. I'm sure that many of you know that Siemens had a compliance affair, and a lot has changed after this in the company, and there's a lot of attention in complying with these rules and regulations and legislation, but that's not sufficient. I could talk so much longer about this too.
So that is a very interesting point. On the one hand, you have the national trade union work, strengthen this in order to have more clout internationally. And I just thought about the scenarios that Ms. Ponce de Castillo was presenting. So there is kind of an orientation which way to go if you want to achieve certain things. What does this mean for trade union work? Because international trade union work is always a difficult business. What does this mean for you and for your future strategy? Let me start with our concept of the right business model in times like these. First of all, this should be supporting climate action and also be supported by good work of those companies that come under the collective bargaining agreement and ensure prosperity. This would be the scenario of eco-village as well. That means that we have a controlled climate change and an equal or just distribution of prosperity, more equal at the end of the day. For trade union work, I don't really know where to start. So this means, on the one hand, to make clear again and again, and that is no easy task, that for the next years of a transition, we will certainly not want to fall behind the Paris climate goals. We want to be the spearheads of climate action in a way that it does not go hand in hand with massive job losses and unfair work. So this is a very important aspect of transition, and we want to make very clear that we see that we cannot just opt out of the business model of Germany overnight with this industrial core that we have. And this is why we advertise a perspective up to 2030, for which we have requirements in the political German debate. For example, when it comes to the electricity price break, which has to be renewed, especially for energy-intensive companies, so that they are enabled to ensure a green energy transition and the introduction of renewable sources of energy into their production. So here we have the goals of ecological transformation that are going hand in hand with the goals of decent work and preserving jobs in Germany. And now let me take the perspective of international trade union work. We are not blindsided when we travel the world. Ms. Kofler mentioned before the Just Energy Transition Partnerships. Let me just give you a hands-on example of international trade union cooperation and how it can work really well. At the COP26 in Glasgow in November 21, the Conference of Parties, that is, there was an agreement that the energy partnerships should be introduced. And the first country of the industrial countries that pledged 8.5 million was South Africa. So these were the funds that were given to South Africa by the industrial countries. And we believe that a successful transition is a just transition. And this is why we believe energy partnerships should be created as such. But what happened was the following. The government of South Africa, together with the major energy companies, were kind of hijacking the process. Trade union representatives were not at all at the table. There was a privatization wave that started in the South African economy. And this is impossible. You know, this is the abuse of our funds for just transition. And it's kind of greenwashed by the major energy corporations. And now we exerted a lot of pressure through the German government. Thank you very much for the support. And therefore, now the colleagues of COSATU, which is the largest trade union organization, umbrella organization in South Africa, and they are at the table and they can co-determine where the investment funds go that were made available in the context of the Just Energy Transition Partnerships in South Africa. So that is a major breakthrough. And it shows that international trade union work is something that matters. And we also cooperate with the Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation, the BMZ, with the DGB. With our organization, we have introduced the position of so-called scouts. They are kind of part of an international exchange program for young trade unionists that come to join us so that they understand what we understand by co-determination and collective bargaining, as well as a social democratic transformation. And we are also encouraging our trade union members to spend some time with our international organizations. So this is something which is really hands-on and which is also thankfully supported by the BMZ. That is just something I wanted to add. Okay, let us speak about the legal requirements and regulations. You spoke about the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act. It's a very German word. And I can really imagine that we also have something else. For example, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, which is not better, and that's the EU directive. So this is the attempt of trying to internationally regulate the socio-ecological transformation. So we spoke about this interconnection, the difficulties that go hand in hand with this, and what can be the impact of regulations with these complex situations. Let me underline that, first of all, it's important to have this because we had so many voluntary commitments before. And let me just say, this was just nonsense. Everybody was claiming they were doing all the best things and they had the best intentions. There were good companies, there were good initiatives. I'm not denying this, but at the end of the day, this did not lead to a substantial change. And it is not fair. If you have to compete, there are some companies that do ecological dumping, wages dumping, and then you have the other companies that offer decent conditions. And this is unfair competition, we have to say. So I am a major advocate of the Supply Chain Due Diligence Act, and we fought for this a lot in the Foreign Office back then and also in the BMZ with my predecessor. I think it's a very important thing. Since 1st of January of this year, it is in effect. Now it needs to be controlled. Sanctions need to be imposed. And there is a clear catalogue of fines that can be imposed. And the possibilities that exist legally should also be used. And trade unions also have their options there. Of course, in the field of co-determination, there is more to be done, but I am very happy that we got this passed as a law first and foremost. But I believe tools like process standards for colleagues from the South so that you can also try and monitor processes from here for our colleagues in the South. This is a very important aspect. And with everything, there is, of course, some way to go. Certainly, we can improve. And the BAFA that is in charge of monitoring this has clearly received more resources. They are doing a lot of work. I can only encourage trade unions to get in touch with works councils to start a discourse so that they can identify their options about what can be done in cooperation with the colleagues from the South. And with the European directive, I hope that a couple of things will be regulated. For example, responsibility and liability in the field of civil law, and ecological standards should also be increased. This is something that is only just an annex to our law. And I think that this will have an impact because we're only just getting started and we really need to start a discourse about the rules. This is not so trivial, especially not with the countries from the south, because they say, well, you are applying standards that we cannot respect and you just want to exploit us like this is neo-colonial exploitation. So we really are being accused of this, and we need to work with the partner countries so that they are put in a position to fulfill, to respect those standards. So here again, development cooperation is demanded, and we also need to educate and show partner countries how they can do this. We have a German help desk, and we would like to make this a European help desk, a European initiative where, together with companies, with rights holders, with trade unions, as well as governmental and non-governmental organizations, we can offer help desk services so that you can really receive information about grievance mechanisms and the rights that you have. And I believe that there is a lot of work, but I'm convinced that without these rules, this is not possible. And it is also a United Nations directive on human rights and business. This is nothing that the West has thought up, but this is scientifically founded. Professor Ruddy was the driving force behind this. Professor Ruggie was the driving force behind this. I believe it is not a magic bullet, but I think it is one of the things that we can use. And it also gives us policymakers the opportunity to speak about such things like labor laws and how capacity building can be done, what can be done in order to reach better regulations. And this is very important in our political work. So before you said you were in Bangladesh. This, of course, is a law that requires some time. But what was your first-hand impression? Is there something that is trickling down? Is there something that is noticeable? What are the time horizons we need to get used to? I have not been contacted so much about a German law internationally than I was about this one. And there were also the textile associations representatives that were contacting me about this. There are strong trade unions in Bangladesh as well. And it is very important to discuss with our trade union representatives to find out how their room for maneuver can be increased, and also talk to the business owners. You also want to sell good products. You want to evolve. You know, as a country, you want to become upgraded to a new category so that you're not a least developed country anymore. You want to market your products, you want to process your products, and part of this is workers and labor standards as well. And together with the GIZ, we are also trying to get the textile workers on board that are working in the formal sector so that they have an accident insurance. And this is also the first step towards formalizing their workplace. We hope that there will also be another effect, and I believe that the freedom to unionize will be a next topic to be addressed, because, you know, trade unionists, sometimes they are even threatened by being injured or being attacked, and this is a topic that needs to be addressed as well. That is so interesting. Let me just add the corporate perspective. I know that this is a flanking measure. It is good. With Siemens, we had the business guidelines before. We have the International Framework Agreement, where many essential elements that are now cast in law were part and parcel of the agreement. But the question is, how is this going to be implemented? For example, this should not be a bureaucratic monster. This is what employers keep saying, and I can understand this. For example, you know, we have one smoke detector that has 28 different parts that come from subcontractors. And now we need to check very precisely what are the suppliers. Digitalization can help us. And where do the suppliers source their materials? So this is a huge bureaucratic effort. And at the end of the day, it also needs to be backed by a business plan once you want to make changes. And we want to make use of this. This brings me to skilled labor because, you know, the turnover, for example, in India, in South America, is immensely high. And Siemens is competing with other companies there. And for its employees, Siemens wants to create good working conditions so that the turnover is not so high. We traveled to India recently and we looked at the situation. And if I may give the example, this was about the acquisition of Siemens, and a trade union colleague that we know from the Siemens Workers Union contacted us, and he said, we want to unionize. And those who are now interested in becoming trade union members are all now dismissed. This is something we wanted to experience firsthand. And we realized that because Siemens took over the company, the employment conditions improved. And the workers' representations that exist now say now, wow, now we are getting paid in good time on the 1st of the month. And I could not work there for a long time, 35 to 40 degrees centigrade. And now they have fans. They did not have fans before. So all of these are conditions where we're not discussing ecological aspects. We're talking about occupational health and safety. And this is something that was now improved. So this is before the colleagues can start thinking about the climate. Yes, so these are also power issues. And Mr. Fischer, the question is, and how far the laws we just discussed, and how far they are helpful when it comes to try and make up for power imbalances. Well, let me illustrate this. In 2022, we had a national action plan on the implementation of the UN guiding principles. And 12 to 14% of the companies with more than 500 employees respected the due diligence in the way the National Action Plan had envisaged. So this on self-commitments, voluntary commitments. This is why we need binding regulations. For example, the Supply Chain Act or the EU directive on sustainability reporting of companies, a very important element. And I would also be the first person to say that, of course, companies should not be suffocated by reporting requirements. But I also have to say that the employers use this as an argument all the time in order to refuse such reporting. When it comes to the impact, I think that we need to have the necessary controls, the necessary oversight, and we also need to have not only a national supply chain act, but also a European supply chain act, which would then comprise more elements in the supply chain and due diligence with their regard. And this might then contribute to a situation where the reporting obligations for companies are not suffocating them. Because one effect could be, once there are effective controls, that the supply chains themselves are modified. The number of subcontractors might be, or intermediaries might be reduced, and also the ecological footprint might improve. So when it comes to the complexity of supply chains, this might also have a positive impact. And now, let me add some water to the wine. What we are observing at the moment, and this holds true for the European Supply Chain Act, which is going into the trilogue. And this is also something which holds true for the Sustainability Reporting Directive. The employers are trying to confront this everywhere. And this is why I'm saying this. Because you were speaking about the burden imposed on them. Because at the moment, the European Commission, now it's going to be a bit technical, Yes, I think this is the case when we speak about the European Commission. So through the EU Balancing Directive, the Commission is trying to redefine the threshold values for companies. So companies that are qualified as being large at the moment in Europe are going to be reduced to being the category of an SME. But for the SME, the sustainability reporting requirements are much less. So at the moment, they are trying to reduce the bureaucracy upon pressure of the European Commission, but this, because the employers were requiring this, they are trying to soften the requirements. But we believe this is a very important aspect because the sustainability reporting requirements is also envisaging a strong representation of employee representatives on supervisory boards and elsewhere. So we do not want to be betrayed when it comes to this. Yeah, let me also add that when we speak about the taxonomy or bureaucracy, this is not only about fulfilling KPIs. No, it's a different form of practice. It's about implementation. And I come from the practical field. I come from implementation. And I wonder how I can do this. Because as a General Works Council member, I only have a limited regional influence. And at the level of the supervisory board, we discuss strategic topics. We don't speak about the operative business because for business operation, the board of management is in charge. So if we really want to make a difference on the employee side, we need more power. And of course, this is power that we have to have politically through networking, through training in other countries, but we also need to have a leeway because otherwise people will say, oh, look, the supervisory board, or rather the Works Council members are traveling to Brazil or China or India. What are they doing there? And what is the reason for this? This is, favoring Works Council members and for travels. And this was really not about this. This is about trying to strengthen and support colleagues in those countries, helping them so that they can help themselves. That's our motto. And I just recently read that we do not want to have a value imperialism. Our co-determination, which is also a specific culture, co-determination in Germany is not only a law, it is a cultural matter. And this is something that we cannot translate to the United States or India or China. They have to have their own sets of rules. But more power to the employee side. Sure, we can discuss legal wordings for a long time, but this is not going to help.
Ms. Kufler, you wanted to respond? Well, I can only agree. I think it would be really interesting to have a panel or a discussion in which we focus on the Supply Chain Act and the European Directive because, yes, the devil's in the details. I also have to say that for years now, and I focused on NAB, I was responsible for this back then, etc., and I experienced the topic of bureaucracy, and this is serious, but oftentimes it's presented as an argument that prevents and stands in the way of rules and regulations. BAFA, this is your monitoring authority. There are handouts which focus on this. And this is what I tell all of the companies that like to complain to me. It's not the companies, in more cases, and more often than not, it's the associations. And then they said, did you ever call there? Did you ever request information? Did you ever take a look at the help desk's homepage? So that you know exactly what the requirements are and what is not, because there are some made-up things that are talked about. But this is really my favorite topic. That's why I'm talking about this. The basic foundation of the Supply Chain Act would be the processes. We do not want to have something on paper and maybe sue 2 or 3 people. No, we want that the processes change and that the working conditions change. That's what it's about at the end of the day. And I'm very passionate in talking about this. There is a session on the topic of Supply Chain Act. Take a look at the program. So here it's more intensely about the topic. So thinking of almost all of the topics that we're discussing, there is a session in which you can go into depth. May I also add a question to the panel? Yes. Why does reporting work when it's about quality management, quality assurance in the supply chain, but not the due diligence of companies. Okay, so everyone who wants to participate in the session may have taken note of that now. So we already have the final round, Martin. We have 5 more minutes, and I am addressing this to you. We would like to have a brief concluding round and would like to talk about the global act and talk about more about Bruno Bringel too. Yes, what is the political vision, the political frame that we need for a socio-ecological transformation from the view of politics, the unions, and the companies? We already heard a lot of input, but maybe we can try to very briefly and concisely summarize that for the concluding round. I know this is challenging, but maybe we can go for a brief summary. Maybe you would like to start. Well, briefly, Bruno Bringel in the manifesto, and we all missed him today, said that more political imagination is required. We need to have more utopian visions of a different society to implement exactly what we discussed here and to also balance out the power situation, just as you mentioned right now. This just as background information. Well, the guiding vision for us trade unions is a just transition. We fought intensely so that this is also enshrined in the climate protection agreements and that it's binding. Keyword that is very important for us, it was a major breakthrough, was a decision of the ILO this year. So for the first time, it was stated that trade unions are central to transformation. And it was stated that negotiations of social partners, that is collective bargaining agreements, are key as well, and that on a sectoral, regional, and company level, this would have to be presented. And this is an ILO decision, and that is why the ILO would have to be involved more at the COP conferences in the future. Second, what is new? What is innovation? Just 3 keywords. Most of you in the room know the Venda project that we established. Is there a session on this? Yes, this has to do with coal mining, but something almost no one knows is that the Brazilian CUT, which is the umbrella organization of trade unions in the north of the country, is conducting dialogues on site to accelerate the renewables industry. All in North Africa and in the Middle East has promoted the further qualification and training of people to transformation pilots. So we have a lot of good ideas and are there on site. Okay, briefly, Ms. Steinbaum, please. Well, maybe it's more of utopia. The problem is this: where the environment is exploited, humans are exploited as well. And that is why you would have to address both of these aspects. My utopian vision would be a world without war, in which all resources and all efforts are towards preserving our livelihood, the foundation of our existence. So I can agree with what Bruno Bringel said, and only controlling the area of competition will not be sufficient. What has to be promoted more would be the rights of the workers' representatives as well as technology and innovation, because I think this is also a solution to solve environmental problems. Thank you, Ms. Kofler. Oh, to say things very briefly is always very difficult. So the socio-ecological transformation is not only ticking the box and business as usual, but transformation is the key word. This means I have to change something about the structures and the power situation. As a legislator, that's not always that easy because of the devil in the detail that we already discussed. But we have to change the frame conditions, and on an international level, this means a lot of discussions, conversations, because we cannot just order and impose what other countries have to do, which is a good thing. But this is a very important aspect. And there's one aspect we have not discussed at all. I'll just mention it here because we also conduct a feminist development policy or politics. And this is a wish I have, and it shouldn't be utopia. And I do not want to wait for 300 years until we have equal rights for men and women. I still want to experience this during my lifetime. Okay, thank you very much for this last aspect you just mentioned, Ms. Kofler. Thank you to everyone for this wonderful conversation and the passion that all of you have. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.